Welcome to the Great Women in Compliance podcast, hosted by Hema Lomax and me, Lisa Fine. Today is a very special episode as we are talking to someone who truly defines a great woman in compliance. We're talking to a luminary. Hui Chen is here. Most of you don't need an introduction to Hui, as she is well known from her work as the first compliance counsel expert at the Department of Justice, and she's the author of the Evaluation of Corporate Compliance for the Fraud section, which is the predecessor of the Department of Justice guidance. So when you refer to the ECCP, you are referring to Hui's work. Since leaving the Department of Justice, she has continued as a leader in the corporate compliance world, and most recently starting CDE Advisors with Zach Casilia, and they co-host a podcast called The Better Way, which tries to help answer the question that, I think I ask myself almost every day, which is, there's got to be a better way. So with that, Hui, thank you so much for joining us. And as I mentioned, you started being synonymous with the work of at DOJ. Can you tell us about your path before that into compliance?
Well, first, thank you so much for having me and for your kind words. I very much appreciate it. I'm blushing a little bit. Thank you again for those kind words. So life before DOJ, let me do a really quick version. I was trained as a lawyer. I went to law school at UCLA, and my dream always was to be a prosecutor. So I went to DOJ right after law school under the Attorney General's honors program. I was there for about 5 years, 3 years in Washington, D.C., and then later another 2.5, almost 3 years in the Eastern District of New York, U.S. Attorney's Office. Then I went in-house because of an unusual opportunity that was presented to me with Microsoft to do intellectual property enforcement in Eastern Europe. And that was a region that had fascinated me since law school. And so I really, really wanted this opportunity to be on the ground there. I was with Microsoft doing IP enforcement in Europe for 3 years. And then I came back to the New York area with them again to do IP enforcement work in the United States. Then 9/11 happened. I was in New York. I was very active in both helping with the victims' families as volunteer, but also as a volunteer in my church. And as a result of that experience, I decided to become a minister. So I went to Princeton Theological Seminary. I got my Master of Divinity degree. I worked in the seminary, and wasn't too long before I realized that my personality was much better suited as a lawyer than as a minister. So I decided, I asked Microsoft that I said, I'd like to come back to law. And they said, how would you like to do compliance in China? And I said, well, that's about as different from being a minister in New Jersey as can be. So sure, sign me up. So that was how I cut my teeth on compliance, was as an underground Microsoft's first in-field compliance officer based in Beijing, deployed just before the 2008 Olympics. And from there, I spent a couple of years in Beijing, and then I, again, keep going back to New York, went back to New York with Pfizer, and then later went to London with Standard Chartered Bank. And it was while I was in London that the DOJ opportunity came up.
And so when you started there, kind of talk a little bit about how you went from starting there to then authoring this huge piece of work that all of us knew. Before I met you, I always knew of the Hui Chen memo. That's what we called it. So,
oh dear. All right. So when I got there, it was like coming home. That was the fraud section is in the same building where I used to work as a young prosecutor in DOJ. It was just, I think, one floor down from a couple of the offices where I had worked. So everything working with prosecutors was the next best thing to being a prosecutor, and being a prosecutor was still always my all-time favorite job. So I really was tasked with trying to come up with better ways, back to that better ways theme that we talked about, trying to come back with better ways to assess companies' compliance program when they are facing DOJ investigations. And the Justice Department then, looking to resolve the case with them in some way. Really, if you look at that document, that was really all about asking questions. And it's what kind of questions can we be asking so that we get a really good understanding of what is happening with your compliance program? Is it working? How did you design it? How do you know it's working? So that document really was born out of asking many of those questions in these sessions where companies are making their compliance presentations. And I noticed the way they were preparing for these meetings. They would come in with binders and binders of documents. And I would say to them, if you could show me one person, including you, who's read all of these documents, then I will look at them. And I never got one person who admitted to having read all of those documents, all those policies and procedures. So I thought they were ready to answer a lot of check. They prepared for check the box
Yeah,
questions, but they were not prepared to be asked more questions about how do you know it's working?
right.
What thought went into designing this other than you got some checklist from somewhere? For example, one of the questions that was on the original document was, to what extent did you involve your stakeholders in when you design policies? And that came from my own experience as an in-field compliance officer, that it's one thing to draft a policy or a set of procedures in your own ivory tower when you've never run a sales event. You have never run a marketing event. You've never stood before customers trying to pitch your product or services. And having those stakeholders' input in your design is critically important because it is meant to, those policies and procedures are meant to govern the way they do business. And if you don't know how they do business, if you don't have their input, how are you supposed to come up with something that would work? So a lot of it comes from just not just my experience, that we also consulted with various people as we were formulating those questions, as we were asking those questions in compliance presentations. So it was an accumulation of these things. And then at some point, I just thought, instead of having people prepare in a way that was inconsistent with what we were expecting, why don't we tell them what we're going to ask
Yeah,
so that they can prepare properly? So that was really the idea, was that transparency was before. So it started out with getting these questions sent to companies counsel before they come in for a presentation. I know you have a compliance presentation scheduled in this case, in 2 weeks. Here are some of the questions we might ask, just to let you know so you can prepare accordingly. And then we thought, why don't we just tell everybody
yeah.
that this is the kind of questions that we're asking? So that really was the genesis of that document.
But it is really helpful. And there are a lot of aspects that you can always go back to that are so practical. And it helped, I think, a lot in just from a training and also in a learning standpoint, where people are like, we want to make sure everyone finishes the training. Are they actually learning anything? Will they remember anything? Does it have anything to do with what they're doing every day? And I think it really was that has helped us move to where we are or constantly moving towards, which we'll talk a little more, is this ethical decision making standpoint. And I think that was like the first point in it.
What I thought was interesting was that eventually it became a guidance document, and it's funny to me in a couple of ways. One is that when we were working on finalizing this document for making it public, some people in the fraud section started referring to it as guidance, and I was very, very insistent that it's not guidance. And as I said, this is not guiding anybody to do anything. We're not giving you the answers about how to do something. We're just telling you how we're going to be assessing your program. And these are just questions for a very specific context for companies that are about to be making a presentation to the DOJ because they're under investigation. And my insistence and in treating it as non-guidance became a joke because they started referring to that document as non-guidance. So this non-guidance, so what should we do with it? And the fact that it later actually became guidance seems ironic to me, because I still take the position that criminal prosecutors are not in a position to be giving guidance to people in the company about how to run their compliance programs. That is not what they do. Prosecutors prosecute crimes. They can tell you what constitutes a crime,
Right.
but they cannot, they're really not the subject matter expertise about how a business organization is run. So I find that ironic. The other thing that I find ironic is that it became a criminal division guidance document, and it seems like it did so without the input of many other sections of the criminal division. Criminal
Right.
division has a lot of sections: narcotics and dangerous drugs, organized crime. We have money laundering. We have intellectual property enforcement. Many of those, hopefully with the exception of organized crime section, do some form of corporate investigation and prosecution. I'm not seeing any of their input in that document, which I, again, find interesting.
It is. And thinking about it, I don't think about it very often from the government perspective or the prosecution perspective as somebody who's been in-house, but where it really is very helpful and valuable, whether it's guidance, non-guidance, or somewhere in the middle, is to be able to say, well before being prosecuted, is these are the questions that they're asking. And I think that it has helped this field a tremendous amount in being able to have this understanding or background coming from the government while not fixing what it was intended to do. It actually really helped a lot of us to be able to give that context and as a result help our business be able to get the stakeholders involved, because it wasn't just these compliance people asking about it. It was the governments, and other governments followed along.
Yeah, they did, and I'm obviously very pleased to see the influence it has had. But when I think back to the genesis of it, it makes me sad a little bit that what makes an impact and what persuades stakeholders is something coming from a criminal prosecution agency, not coming from inside the companies, not coming from common sense about how to approach programs, about how to approach one's work. But this does, reflect some of my frustrations about why do we always look to the government. When you're raising children, you're not always looking to the juvenile delinquent office for your guidance, and that's what we're doing as a professional community, and that is something that I've always struggled with.
Yeah, I think that makes complete sense, and I don't disagree with that at all. I think a lot of the time, and I think a lot of us are always trying to shift that discussion in this, and then you have in almost any part of business, people say, well, what are the consequences, or what is the worst case scenario? And
Indeed.
oftentimes the worst case scenario is we've broken the law and now you're in trouble. And I don't like that part either. And I think day-to-day people, in your day-to-day job, you're not thinking about that. You're thinking, are the people around me ethical? Are they trying to make the right choices and decisions? But I do think it has had an impact in helping that.
Indeed.
So then to totally change, after that, you and Zach started CDE Advisors in July 2024. Your favorite job was being a prosecutor, and I'm sure your favorite colleague now is Zach. Tell me a little bit about what inspired you to do what you're doing now.
Well, I haven't been a prosecutor in a few decades now, at least a couple of decades now. And I miss it. I miss the courtroom. I miss the excitement. I miss feeling like I am serving justice.
Mm-hmm.
But taking prosecutor takes a lot out of you. It's a very, very demanding job. And at some point in my life, I know I don't have that stamina anymore. So ever since I came out of DOJ, I had been practicing as a private consultant. And I have enjoyed taking what I've seen both in-house as someone who used to be in-house doing this work, and having seen it from the government side, seeing how things have gone wrong, and putting that knowledge and experience to work for companies that really do want to take their compliance program to the next level. So I was practicing on my own for a few years, and then just around the time I left DOJ, Zach, who succeeded me at Pfizer. So when I left Pfizer, I handpicked him as my successor because he had impressed me so much as an outside counsel. So he came into Pfizer, and during the time I was at DOJ, he was at Pfizer, and he had built Pfizer's first data analytics program for their compliance department. And it really was a state-of-the-art program that he built. And he was frustrated by seeing that there's really no service providers out there that could combine legal, behavior science, and data in their approach to serving companies' ethics and compliance needs. So he said he wanted to build something like that. And so when he was thinking about that, I was about to leave DOJ. So I remember having a conversation on the rooftop of some hotel in New York. And I think it's a great idea, but don't go to a law firm. But he did. He went to a law firm. And the reason I say don't go to a law firm was law firms are more traditional organizations. And for a long time, lawyers are prohibited from being in business with other professionals. So as a result, law firms are still adapting to whether and to what extent they can incorporate other professionals like behavior scientists and data scientists in their practice. So that was the reason I suggested him not to go to a law firm, because I feel like those aspects might be constrained a bit. But his reason I understand, because many companies still do go to law firms as their first stop for their compliance needs. And they also like the idea of potentially having work done under attorney-client privilege, so that necessary parts of their program information and data and all that can be protected. So that's an understandable reason. So he went to a law firm, and I was doing my practice, and I was watching what he was doing. And when he hired the first behavior scientist, I was quite surprised. I was really surprised that he was able to make it happen in a law firm. So eventually he convinced me to join him. We were all together doing this work in a law firm for a couple of years. And I think that's where some of the constraints that I had thought about became more obvious, because what we were doing was fundamentally different from the practice of law. We were trying to approach ethics and compliance as a deeply human exercise, as a data-driven exercise. So being part of a large organization governed by very strict conflict of interest rules means that you're very limited in what clients you can take on. I mean, numerous times clients would approach me, but because there's a conflict with somebody from an office in some other country sometimes that I've never even met on a completely unrelated matter, but the client doesn't want to waive conflict, then we can't take on the conflicted client, right? So that was presenting a lot of limitations that ultimately that's what led Zach and me to decide that let's go out on our own and just, really pursue the vision that we have.
And so, yeah, you guys have been doing this for almost a year now.
Yes, and we love it. So first of all, we don't do billable hours. We don't have to track hours. All of our projects are fixed fee based, and we love that.
Yeah.
I have never wanted to do billable hours, and now I'm free from that. And we get to do really disruptive and innovative things. And when we tried to name our company, we thought what was important to us. And so CDE stands for Culture, Data, Ethics, and those are the things we do. And we do them in ways that I think are very different than what you normally see in the market. Certainly very, very different than what you would do in a law firm. And we're really enjoying ourselves.
Yeah, and having listened to some of the podcasts and reading different things, a lot of what you're doing is also really quite provocative in terms of a different way of thinking. And one of the issues that way that I saw was talking about this pause, quote unquote, pause in the FCPA enforcement. I like how you say, and I've thought about this, that many people see it as a crisis, but you're also talking and focusing on the opportunity side of it and basically looking at what works and what is a good way to run a program, like what you were talking about before, as opposed to looking at the DOJ as saying, this is what you have to do. It's almost, even though I don't love using the word holistic, it is forcing people to be a little more holistic in how you're running a program and being ethical.
Indeed, I will confess that when I heard the news, a smile sort of just broke on my face, and I said, I think this is good news.
Yeah, and how do you think people are responding now, both in terms of the US and other countries, really reflecting on it, or are they just still running around confused? What are you seeing?
I see the companies that already have a very internal value-driven program proceeding as they had always before. So for those companies that had already shifted to more value-driven, not enforcement-driven type of program, this hasn't changed much for them. And for the companies that have, and the compliance officers that have really always relied on using the DOJ as the big stick, and I think for the industry that has relied on, I would say, oftentimes hyping DOJ messages to sell their products and services, I think they are trying to find a way forward. That's what I'm seeing.
Yeah, that's it's interesting. I think for a lot of us, it's a bit of a combination of using the guidelines and using the other things that really matter to that in the big picture of ethics. Like I said before, doing the right thing. Also, working in global companies, there'll be different laws in different places. It's not like everyone woke up one day and said start bribing. It's not a sea change, but expectations do help a little bit, but I think it's moving us past the helping those who didn't through the sheriff's department approach of just saying these are the rules and this is bad, or no, because it's easier to actually really have to think substantially. What I mean, is that more of what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, I used to go out and ask people if there was no FCPA, how would that change your approach? So that I kind of like the fact that that's no longer a hypothetical,
Right.
in a way. There still is FCPA, but I don't believe it will be enforced in anything like the way we have seen it in the past couple of decades. I think the other thing that I really would hope would result from this pause is, my God, ethics compliance is about so much more than foreign bribery. It's like we took a universe of all the good that we could be doing and we decided to choose one tiny little particle of it to focus and make that our universe. And I hope this pause will change that.
Where do you see, or what do you think in an ideal world would be where how people expand their focus? What do you like to see a little more of in
Well,
that?
if you do ethics, so let's think about what is ethics. Ethics is really a set of principles and values you have. And where do principles and values matter? They really matter in relationships. I mean, if you live in a cave as a solitary person, your ethics really doesn't matter because it doesn't impact anything or anyone. You're just living on in a cave and you don't interact with anything other than perhaps the grass and the birds around you. But ethics matter, your values matter when you have relationship. And think about the relationship a company has with all its different stakeholders, with its employees, with its investors, with its community, with its suppliers, with its business partners, with the earth,
Yeah.
and with government, right? With government enforcement and regulators. So those are all those stakeholders are part of your ethics, how you treat them.
Yeah.
That's where your ethics matter. And what I think this obsessive focus on FCPA has led to is we have put one category of stakeholder above all else. Only what the regulators and enforcers says matters to us. Our relationship with all the other people. How do we treat our investors and employees and third parties and business partners and all of those, our communities around us, the communities in which we operate our business, the communities into which we're selling our products and services. None of it seemed to matter for compliance programs nearly as much as what regulators and enforcers say about FCPA.
Yeah.
That is wrong. And I rarely make such a strong statement, but I think that obsessive focus on one set of stakeholders over one set of matters is not the right thing to do.
Especially if we're trying to think like a business, you have to look at various risks in other areas. I think that in what's happening right now helps with that. On the other hand, I think one of the concerns, and I recently did a panel, and one of the people asked at the end, how are you helping your organizations? And with saying that it matters and your tone at the top, that it's important to be ethical when, and this was a couple of days after the president got the gift of the jet, the Qatari jet.
Yes.
And which is does not, I will say, regardless of where you stand with government, that doesn't really help to explain to the people that you're limiting either different meals or other things for legitimate reasons for entertainment. Where I come out, and it is at the end of the day, regardless of what's happening at those levels of government, people want to go to work every day and feel like the people they work sit next to are ethical people and care about doing the right thing.
Yeah, I mean, I also, the Qatari jet has come up in conversations with clients, right? So they're telling me pretty much the same thing, that I'm talking to our employees about meal limits, and then they see our president receiving a jet as a gift. And this is why, I long before this pause, I've been saying, like, do it because you believe in it. Because in this moment, it will be so much better if you were able to tell your employees, I never told you to do this because we were afraid of DOJ, just because we're afraid of DOJ. I told you to do this because this is who we are.
Right.
Right. So it doesn't matter what the president does. The president can take no jet or a space shuttle. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And it is about what we do, what we as an organization believe in and value, and how we operate. If you were able to say that, that would be so much better. The other problem is that I think there's just so much FCPA industry hype.
Mm.
That is what is driving some of that obsessive focus on the minutia. There is no right or wrong thing between a meal limit of $25 and $50. I'm sorry, there just isn't.
Right.
You can't reduce that to this is the right thing or the wrong thing. It's a realistic, really financial consideration.
Right. The only exception I would say on that is that in the US and some of the states, if you're going to work with the state officials, there are times then you just have to follow it. And that also, you have to do it, but that isn't something we're saying for finance. That's smart business, like any other regulation or rule.
And this is also where I say there's many other types of compliance. Again, let's focus, let's broaden our site here. There are many types of compliance that has nothing to do with whether you think is the right thing or not, which is why I really push back on people when they reduce it to do the right thing, because sanctions compliance, it doesn't matter. You could love or hate the individual or countries that is being sanctioned, but you have to do it if you're doing business under the jurisdiction of the sanctioning authority.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what your beliefs or values are, because the sanctions is an inherently political decision.
Exactly.
You have to follow it.
Sometimes it's like the speed limit. You might not agree with it, but you're going to follow it.
That's exactly right.
Or you're getting a ticket. And I think it is really an interesting thing that way. Plus, I mean, not just, we've been talking about the FCPA, other countries have rules also that if you're going to be working in those countries, regardless of in the big picture, whether they're anti-corruption or other rules, you have to follow those as well.
Well, now that you're on this topic, I don't understand why are many compliance officers we see are only interested in briberies that happen in other countries. What about bribery in our own backyard?
Yeah.
When we have bribery cases, which we do, lots of them, they don't get any coverage, zero, in the compliance community.
Yeah, it is interesting. I think we've all gotten so into the foreign part of the FCPA, but there's a lot of bribery. There are a lot of issues. And the other thing is, I think, this is my hot take, is that if we've been so interested in foreign countries, don't you think those other countries are going to suddenly go back and look at us in the same way? And if you spend several years telling the world and everyone gets all excited about the FCPA and you're on a pause, can't believe I'm still talking about it, but then all of a sudden, don't you think those other countries who may not have agreed with it and felt victimized by it, who do you think they're going to go after first?
Yeah, I think this is why I think it's a healthy thing to have this pause for the compliance community. I don't want anyone to misunderstand my message. I think FCPA is a good law, and when it's not blown out of proportion by people trying to sell their products and services, it is fundamentally a good principle. And companies should be prosecuted for bribery, foreign or domestic. And I want to be clear, that's where I stand on that. But I do think this pause is perhaps a good thing. It is a good thing in broadening people's thinking beyond just this form bribery, and it's all about meals and entertainment, this type of narrow focus that people have gotten accustomed to. It's like if the compliance profession was a business organization trying to sell products, we could be producing so many products for our consumers. But somehow we decided to go with only one product line. And suddenly that product line looks like it might be near its patent expiration.
Yeah.
Right? And
Yeah.
that's what we're looking at. Now we're like, oh my God, like what do we do? There must be some way to keep our patent still alive for this one product. The way to do it now is not to think about how do we extend the patent on this one product that we've chosen to sell.
Exactly.
Start looking at some other products that you should be selling.
Exactly. Now, is that, I'm going to segue to this, is that when you talk a lot about the human-centric approach, is that what you're thinking about? And how does that relate into the core principle of being human-centric? It seems to be.
Very much so. And we find ourselves saying this to clients all the time. Yesterday, Zach and I actually we're speaking virtually at a conference on third-party risk management. And we were talking about how every person who designs a third-party onboarding program, they should go through it themselves at least once. And
Absolutely.
oftentimes because we are vendors. Well, when we become consultants to companies, we actually go through those processes. And it's very interesting that clients who hire us to assess their program, they didn't realize until we started talking to them that the assessment has begun the minute that we're actually going through their vendor onboarding process. If you need a manual or a class or a video instruction for people to go through your program, it's too complicated. That's all I can say, right? It's the same with any program, whether it's your training program or how your policy reads or your third-party onboarding program or whatever it is that you're rolling out. I think oftentimes we forget that there are human beings that are intended to be using these things. Those human beings are not in your head. They don't understand all the things you know. They don't care about all the things that you care about. This to them is just something that they have to do for whatever reason in order to onboard a vendor or in order to make sure they check off their training requirements. So put yourself in their shoes.
Absolutely.
Better yet, put them in front of you and have them tell you what they like and don't like about what you just designed. And it goes back to what we said earlier about sort of that stakeholder involvement in the policy design process. And so the human-centered approach is really nothing more than that, is that whenever you're designing and implementing something, remember the human beings that it's intended for, not you. They're not, and remember that they're not the same as you.
Yeah. And especially onboarding is a great example of that, because when you're doing a vendor onboarding, oftentimes each group that has something related to it as a process, and you end up duplicating work. And when I was doing it, I'm like, this was hard for me. And I do this for a living.
Exactly.
And we all need to work together in those sorts of things so that the poor user person doing it isn't so annoyed because they're rewriting the same 4 pieces of information that you can use once.
Exactly.
And I think about that a lot. Like people don't care who's in compliance and who's in procurement. They just want to get their thing done.
Yes, a lot of this is just the modern corporate silo phenomenon that everybody thinks about their own needs and they're not really coordinating with others in making the experience more seamless for people who are using it. And not at all uncommon when a vendor onboards and we have to go through 5, 6 different sets of questionnaires.
Yeah.
All asking for pretty much the same thing, like you said.
Oh yeah. That is terrible. And another thing about the human-centric, one thing that isn't human, but humans are using and I'm learning is AI. Are you thinking about that? I'm taking advantage of all your expertise on this. What are you seeing in terms of the use cases and the benefits and risks?
Well, it's a perfect segue from what we're talking about, of all the AI. What I'm not seeing is, can I just type in, I want to use this company for this purpose. Tell me what I should worry about. And have that AI give me search all the internal databases, internal information data sets, external publicly available data sets, and give me the answer.
Yeah.
Why can't AI do that? That would be a wonderful use case of AI, which I have not seen or seen anything remotely approaching it. What I do see a lot is the chatbot functions that help answer employee questions. I think that makes sense. I'm seeing sort of AI used in collecting and digesting information for audit and investigation. Those are very perfectly expectable areas in which AI is being used. The third party management piece in terms of really looking at the financial information on the back end, looking at activities and identifying risks from those activities, those are on the market. It's the so they are being introduced in components of things we do, but not as widespread as you would think. I
Okay.
think we still have a ways to go.
I think it's people are starting to get comfortable and then trying to figure out how to best use the tools and to make sure it's hard. I mean, new technologies. I was saying this to somebody recently. I mean, the internet was new for some of us. We've adapted.
Exactly, exactly. I think it's interesting. One of the areas that I suggest that people start using is using AI to help you start a draft for policies.
Mhm.
I have found AI writes much better policies than any of the policies that I've seen written by humans.
Yeah,
The AI write policies that are perfectly understandable, they are digestible, human centered,
yeah.
ironically, more human centered policies than those written by, I hate to say, lawyers.
Well, we were pretty famous for writing codes of conduct or about 30 pages of typeset for a long time. So,
Exactly. So I think there we can that's an area again, I emphasize start with a draft.
right.
And never use AI as your own finished product, but starting it using it to start a drafting process, I find has been helpful in policies and procedures.
Yeah, I think I've helped do that in some of it with some research that's not quite at the level of everything about a corporation, but on a
Yeah.
topic or another, what's come out lately on this or that, I find it pretty helpful. And it's good once you start to feel comfortable in learning it.
Yeah. And
I
there's also
laugh.
good train,
Go
or
ahead.
at least I shouldn't say good. There's also, I see a lot of training AI products out there. And I think the key is whatever you use, you need to be assessing how effective it is. And that question of effectiveness is dependent on the goal that you had set for the training, right? Understand what is your training is supposed to accomplish, and then you measure whether whatever thing you use to deliver that training has helped people achieve that goal.
Now, taking a lot of your time, so I want to ask one other thing about, you in the non-compliance, not non-compliant, but non-compliance life. What do you do for fun outside of work? Do you have a special hobby or to get away from the stress of, of what you do?
I love traveling. So actually this consultant life has been good so that I get to combine business with pleasure so that if I'm going to a new place or a place that that I just enjoy being, I extend my business trip for a few days, for a week, just to enjoy that. So it also gets me to, because the work we do is very international. So I work with business clients from South America to Europe to Asia. So I get to talk to a lot of people around the world, which I really enjoy those cross-cultural exchanges.
Mhm. Me too.
And yeah, I think I used to say I like to read, but now I consume a lot more audiobook than actual physical either paper or Kindle books. So I guess I should say I listen to books
Mm.
and alternate between fiction and nonfiction. So one fiction, one nonfiction. And I probably go through about roughly a book a week or so, and I really enjoy it.
Yeah, listening or reading books. I do that. I find that over the last several years, some of my reading and my pop culture TV and other things is getting either shallower, or just a little bit of an escape in life. And my last question for you is if you're looking back on your day walking into the DOJ or even at Microsoft, or advice that you'd want to give, particularly to women or to your younger self, what do I wish I told myself 20, 30 years ago?
I think I've been very fortunate that I am happy with the turns that life has taken for me.
Mhm.
And I'm happy with the decisions that I have made. I think if I were to give advice to my younger self, it would be to keep doing what I was doing, which was one, do things that you're passionate about.
Mhm.
If you lose your passion, don't stick around, which is really what I did. If something stopped being interesting, if my work stopped being something that I'm passionate about, then I think about how I can change that. So that's one. And I think the other thing is really be cognizant of the fact that life, we always say that as almost a throwaway sentence, but it's true. Um, Life is too short.
Yeah.
You only, as far as we know anyway, you only live this life once. I was going to say, we only live once, but I guess there are religions and people who believe that's not true. But you certainly only live this life once, and it's about so much more than many of the things that we get caught up in day to day. And I think if you can remember to keep your eyes focused on that more distant horizon about, this is the story of my life.
Yeah.
How does this fit into that bigger story? I think you would gain a perspective that allows you to sort of rise above some of the things that tend to consume us day to day.
It's actually great advice. I think we could all take that. And with that, thank you so much, Wei. On behalf of me, Hema, the Compliance Podcast Network, thank you so much for joining us. And it was such a pleasure to get to speak with you.
Thank you for having me.
Compliance Podcast Network. Start your mornings with daily compliance news, quick, sharp updates on the top compliance and ethics stories in under 5 minutes every morning in Compliance Podcast Network. Because compliance never sleeps. Need practical advice fast? Check out Compliance Tip of the Day. One actionable idea to level up your program. Short and sweet, every day on Compliance Podcast Network. Got 10 minutes? We've got the week's top 10 stories. 10 for 10 brings you the big compliance headlines. Fast, fun, and focused. Every Saturday on Compliance Podcast Network. And don't miss the Sunday Book Review, where compliance meets culture through must-read books and big ideas every Sunday in Compliance Podcast Network. Whether you're in the office, on a walk, or commuting, stay smart, stay ethical, stay tuned. Only on the Compliance Podcast Network. Available wherever you listen to podcasts.